Hey everybody, Rob here at eTrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster front anti-sway bar on our 2014 Forest River Lexington. Having a motorhome can be a really nice thing. We can take some trips with our family and see a lot of places we've never been before. But the one thing a lot of people don't really think about or talk about is how nervous people can be when they're driving their motorhome, because it is a rather large vehicle. Not to mention they don't handle the best. It's a really large vehicle with a lot of area for wind to catch, so we're basically just driving down a giant windscreen. A big truck comes by, pushes you down the road, we end up fighting the steering wheel, moving around in our seat. That's not very enjoyable for us because we're having to concentrate so much on keeping it driving straight, not to mention everyone in the back's getting tossed around. So they're not that enjoyable off the bat. But that's where all those suspension enhancements are going to help out. Everybody wants to have that enjoyment, and they should. Your motorhome should be an enjoyable thing, not a chore. So before we put any components on, we're going to take it on our test course and get a baseline to see how it handles. So I'm going to come up to our slalom course and try to keep it as close to the same speed as possible, right about 10 miles an hour. Just been going in and out of turns just to see how the motorhome handles. And I can already notice the problem a lot of people do. As soon as you go into a turn, you feel like it's leaning before it turns, which kind of makes you feel a little top heavy. Really doesn't react as quickly as it should. And I'm only going 10 miles an hour in a parking lot, so again, on those bigger drives or on the highway or really getting into any kind of traffic and speed, you're definitely going to be feeling those problems a lot more. Even going 10 miles an hour through the course, it definitely feels like I just kind of need to stay at this speed, if not slow down a little bit, because again, each turn I go into is kind of a blind turn. It's not reacting when I think it will, so I really need to pay attention, slow down, and make sure I have a firm grip on the steering wheel. Well, now that we have everything installed, let's go ahead and take it back onto the test course and see what kind of improvements we got. I'm going to try my best to keep it right at that 10 miles an hour so we have a really good comparison. As I come into the first turn, I can already tell a decent amount of difference here, especially in the sway. I don't feel as much of a leaning going on. It does react a little bit quicker. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't feel like I'm driving a sports car, but it definitely feels a lot more manageable and a little bit more predictable of what it's going to do. As I'm coming into the turns, it's reacting quicker, it doesn't want to lean as bad, and again, I just kind of know what it's going to do. It's more predictable, which makes it a lot easier to drive. Definitely a lot smoother and easier to control, and genuinely just feels like I could go faster if I wanted to. I do want to mention we did install more than one component, and the results we're getting were because of the effect of all of them together. We ended up putting the Roadmaster Reflex Steering Stabilizer on the front, the Roadmaster Front Anti-Sway Bar, as well as the Roadmaster Rear Anti-Sway Bar. Now that's what I would suggest anyway, because that will give us full stability from the front of the motorhome all the way to the back. That we don't have to worry about all those things. Typically there's a bathroom, maybe a bedroom in the back. That can cause a lot of weight problems and shifting, but having all those components together, your motorhome will have the full stability. In our experience, most of the time when people get one component, it does help, but they end up coming back and getting the rest of them because the compounding effect makes it that much better. Now that we have our test run done, let's go ahead and take it to the shop and take a closer look. So here's what our Roadmaster Anti-Sway Bar looks like once we have it installed. And it's going to take care of a lot of those problems of that mushy steering feeling, kind of that swaying, almost feel like you're leaning before the motorhome turns. It's going to help that out a lot because it's going to attach directly to the frame as well as the axle. That way everything's going to be supported and it's going to be a lot more stable, giving us a lot more comfortable ride, and we won't have to fight the steering wheel as much, and we can actually enjoy our motorhome. And since we have that really solid attachment point between the frame itself and the front axle, it's going to be using that and the weight of our axle to brace the frame, so whenever we do go to turn, it's going to have the leverage there to keep everything nice and level, which helps out a lot because we're not going to be leaning as much, we won't fight that steering wheel, and we can just relax. Another thing that I really like about our Roadmaster Anti-Sway Bar is that it uses polyurethane bushings instead of traditional rubber ones. Now the polyurethane is going to last longer because it's not going to be as susceptible to breaking down like rubber is, but it's also going to give us a little bit more stability, because when it does start to flex, it'll have a little bit of give, but not as much as rubber, so it's not going to be too tight and stiff of a ride, but it'll give us the support we need and not start to mush and bend, which defeats the purpose of having the bar here. The fact that our sway bar is going to be that much bigger than the factory one automatically means we're going to get better performance. But the bar is actually made out of a better steel, so it won't have as much deflection or tendency to flex, so it'll give us more stability because the bar will be doing its job rather than starting to bend and flex. As far as the installation goes, it's really straightforward. It's just a matter of pulling the old sway bar out and putting the new one in. There's no drilling involved, no cutting or anything like that. And it is designed to work with a lot of other suspension components like the one we have here, the Roadmaster Reflex Steering Stabilizer. Now, I definitely recommend this along with the front sway bar because it'll give you full stability in the front end of your motorhome and make it a lot more comfortable and more enjoyable to get where you're going. But now that we've gone over some of the features, seen what it looks like, let's go ahead and walk through the installation process together. To start our installation, we want to come underneath the front and we'll find our factory sway bar right below our radiator up here. Now, if we come to the side of the frame, we'll see that where it's clamped on and has its bushings. We need to remove all of this, so we'll start by removing the 2 bolts towards the front on each one of these clamps. I'm going to be using an 18mm socket to pull those out. Now, we'll let you know these bolts are pretty tight, so you may want to spray them down with some penetrating oil, give it a little bit of time, and then you may also have to break them loose by hand. I actually had to back them out quite a bit, spray them down, and then I can use my impact to take them out the rest of the way. Now, we're going to have the same bolt on the other side of the frame, so we'll remove that one as well. Now, if we move to the back side of that clamp, we're going to have another bolt holding it in place. We need to remove that one as well. Now, just keep in mind, once you remove this bolt, the sway bar is going to want to start swaying down or rotating down, so you want to watch where you're positioning yourself, especially once you remove the last one. Now, these bolts are a little bit smaller, so we're going to be using a 15mm socket to remove them. Now, if we follow the bar to the end, we'll find our end links, where the end of the bar is going to attach to a link that attaches to the frame. We want to leave the end link in place, but we want to disconnect it from our sway bar. Now, I'll let you know that this bolt coming through, where the end link comes through, most likely you're not going to be able to get a socket on there. So you can grab a 18mm wrench, and a ratcheting wrench will make it a little bit easier, but then we just want to break that bolt loose, take the nut off so we can disconnect the sway bar. Now, whenever you're loosening these up, what I like to do is unthread them pretty far, but make sure you leave that nut on there until you get to the other side. That way you don't have to worry about the sway bar falling off or possibly coming all the way off the end link. Just leave them real loose so you can take them off by hand and let the sway bar down gradually. And then you can grab the sway bar more carefully and we can lower it down to the ground and not have to worry about dropping it. Now, we do want to hold on to the brackets that come with our sway bar. We don't need the bushings or the bar itself, but we do want to make sure we hold on to these brackets. So you can just kind of pop them down and they'll slide right off the bushings. At this point, we can get our new sway bar ready. Now, the way I like to do it is have the 2 sway bars pretty close to each other so I can get an idea of where my bushings need to go. So you can see our bushings are pretty much at the end right before the curves. So I'll grab one of my bushings. We'll grab the lubricant out of the kit. Now, you should wear gloves. This gets pretty messy pretty quickly. We just want to take a good amount. And we're going to lubricate the inside of the bushing here. So you just want to put a good amount in there, make sure it's all nice and coated. And that's going to prevent any kind of squeaking or any kind of noise if moisture were to get inside there whenever we're driving down the road. Now, they are split bushings, So to make it a little bit easier to put them on the bar, just want to open them up. They're a little stiff, but open them up, slide them over the bar. And then we can take our clamp, and that's going to sit right over the bushing. So we'll do the same thing for the other bushing on the other side. Now when we get ready to put our sway bar in, we are going to be reusing all the factory hardware. But they do provide us with some red Loctite in our kit, and you want to make sure that you put a little bit on each one of the bolts. You don't need to use a whole lot, you just want a little bit on the threads, and you want a little bit on each one of the bolts we used. So I'm going to put a small amount on 2 bolts, one for each side, so that I can hang the sway bar and then start getting the rest of the bolts in place. So it is a good idea to have an extra set of hands help you, but what you can also do is use the end of the bar to kind of rest on top of the tie rod here just to help you get it in line. We want to line up our brackets. And again, for now, we just want to at least get 1 bolt hand tight so the sway bar will support itself, and then we'll work on getting the rest of the hardware in. And for the rear bolts, you may have to lift the bracket up depending on how tight you got those front ones just to get them started. But again, you just want a few threads in there, get everything loosely in place by hand. Once you have all 4 bolts in your brackets, we'll take a little bit more red Loctite and we're going to put it on our end link. And then you may have to rotate the bar, kind of twist the end link a little bit to get it to go all the way through. And then again, reuse that factory nut. And we're going to do that same thing on the other side. Now that we have all of our bolts loosely in place, we're going to come back and snug them all down. So use that 18mm socket again for the large bolts in the front. And use that same 15mm socket for the bolts on the back on our shackle mounts. Then you want to make sure you also snug up the end link nuts so they're nice and secure. Then we can come back with a torque wrench, and we're going to torque all of our hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. One thing to keep in mind, if your end links seem like they're not tightening up as you're turning the wrench, it could be because if you look right here, they're going to have a small part on the front. It actually has a couple flat spots on it, so you can get an adjustable wrench or something on there to hold it, because as you see, as I'm turning it, it may start to slow down, but it keeps spinning, so it's really not tightening it up. Now, if you do need to use a wrench to hold that inner part of the end link here, you can use a 19mm socket. You can use a 19mm wrench and it'll hold it nice and tight, but once you get it pretty snug, usually they stop spinning and you can torque them down. Once you have all your bolts torqued down, that'll finish up your installation and your look at the Roadmaster front anti-sway bar.